The year was 324 BC. Alexander the Great stood at the edge of the known world. His empire stretched from Greece to India, a conquest unrivaled in history. But on this day, in the dusty plains of Opis, something was wrong. His men, the same soldiers who had followed him to the ends of the earth, were turning against him. A mutiny was brewing, and what happened next would become one of the most extraordinary speeches in history. This was not just a rebellion. It was a moment that would define Alexander's legacy. Would he crush his men with force, or would he move them with words? To understand this pivotal moment, we must first understand the man and the army that dared to defy him. For over a decade, Alexander's Macedonian warriors had marched with him through blood, sand, and snow. They had faced impossible odds, shattering the Persian Empire, crossing the Hindu Kush, and standing victorious at the Hydaspes. They were more than soldiers, they were brothers in arms. But now, something had changed. The trouble began when Alexander announced his new policy, integrating Persian nobles into his army, granting them honors once reserved for Macedonians. To his men, this was betrayal. Had they bled for nothing? Were they to be replaced by the very people they had conquered? The whispers turned to shouts. The camp erupted, and then silence. Alexander stepped forward. His men expected fury. What they got was something far more powerful. What followed was not just a king addressing his army, it was a leader bearing his soul, and it would change everything. The men had reached their limit. Years of relentless campaigning, the wounds that never fully healed, the homes they hadn't seen in over a decade, it all boiled over in this moment. And then came the final insult, Alexander's embrace of Persian customs, his demand that they kneel before him in the Eastern fashion. To the proud Macedonians, this was not just a change in protocol, it was humiliation. Veteran soldier shouting, "We followed you across the world, Alexander, and now you ask us to bow like slaves." This was no ordinary protest. These were not fresh recruits or mercenaries. These were his heteroi, his companions, the men who had stood beside him since the beginning, and now they were daring to say no to the man who had never known defeat. There had been a time when Alexander was one of them. He drank with them, fought beside them, called them friends. But the longer they marched east, the more distant he became. The Persian robes, the foreign wives, the demands of absolute loyalty. It all felt like a king slipping away from his people. And then, the moment of truth. Would he draw his sword and order executions? Would he crush this rebellion with the same ruthlessness he had shown his enemies? What he did next was far more dangerous. He spoke. What came next was not a threat, not a plea. It was something far more powerful, a reckoning. Alexander, voice firm but not raised. "You wish to leave me? Then go. Go now." Not a shout, not a command, a challenge. With 4 words, Alexander turned the rebellion on its head. This was not the reaction they expected. And now, he would remind them exactly who they were dealing with. One by one, he listed their victories, not as a king boasting of his glory, but as a commander reminding his brothers of what they had done together. "Was it my strength alone that broke the Persians at Gaugamela?" he asked. "Was it my sword that held the line at Issus?" And then, the masterstroke. He stepped down from the platform, walked among them, not as a god king, but as the man they once knew, the boy who had led them at Chaeronea, the young general who had shared their hunger at the Hindu Kush. "You were there when I took my first wound. You carried me back when the Thessalians broke through. Tell me, old friend, was it for Persian gold that you saved me that day?" This was no longer a speech. It was an excavation, digging past the mutiny, past the grievances, down to the unbreakable thing that had bound them for 12 bloody years. And then, the impossible happened. One by one, they disarmed. Not in surrender, but in remembrance. The spears that had conquered empires now lay at their king's feet like offerings. And then, Alexander wept. This was the moment historians would struggle to explain. The invincible conqueror brought to his knees, not by enemy blades, but by the love of his men. He ordered a great banquet, not just for Macedonians, but Persians too. At that feast, something miraculous happened. Old enemies broke bread. Men who had slaughtered each other's kin now drank from the same cup. And at the head of it all, Alexander, no longer just a Macedonian king, but something the world had never seen before. Old enemies broke bread. Men who had slaughtered each other's kin now drank from the same cup. And at the head of it all, Alexander, no longer just a Macedonian king, but something the world had never seen before. This This was his true genius. Not the battles, not the tactics, but the vision. A world where Greek and Persian, victor and vanquished, could become something new. The mutiny at Opis didn't break his empire. It forged it anew. Alexander, weak, ghostly voice, to the strongest. 1 year. That's all the time fate would grant him. 1 year to build the world he envisioned at Opis. As the fever took him in Babylon, his last words became history's greatest what if. With those words, the greatest empire the world had ever seen shattered like glass. His generals, the very men who had wept at Opis, would tear his legacy apart in their hunger for power. The vision of unity died with the visionary, and yet that speech at Opis echoes through time, not just as a masterpiece of rhetoric, but as a glimpse of the ancient world's lost potential. What if Alexander had lived? Could Greek and Persian truly have become one? Could the bloodshed of centuries have ended there, on those dusty plains? We'll never know. But when you stand before the ruins of Persepolis, or walk the streets of modern Herat or Samarkand, remember, for one fleeting moment, a king and his rebellious army almost remade the world. Not through force, but through words that cut deeper than any sword. This is why we remember. Not just the conquests, but the moments when history trembled on the edge of something new. When a speech didn't just change minds, it changed what it meant to be human. If you found this story compelling, consider subscribing to The Past Unfolded for more journeys to history's most pivotal moments.